This is honestly the first time where I usually walk into FTC and I expect everything to be at least an hour late. And now I'm presenting 30 minutes early? What? The world is, it must be the agents. They're just making everything like 100% more efficient. All right. Can I do this? Okay, cool. So today, I wanted to share a very new project. Yes, also some new things happening in the world. Some more positive than others. And in particular, we're talking about a new project. Okay, if I can share the actual full screen. Okay. All right, great. As I mentioned, I thought I had 30 more minutes to write these slides. So I'm going to apologize if I riff all. But today we'll be talking about autonomous organizations. So this is, this is FTC. For those of you who are new, you may not realize, but FTC is on-been adjacent to the Ethereum and sort of blockchain community. And a lot of the topics that we used to cover in FTC were around DAOs. How many people here have heard of a DAO before? Okay, great. So you're gonna get some of the context here. That there's gonna be a small pivot on how we talk about DAOs and related things. But okay, let's talk about building autonomous organizations. So right now, we live in a world in which AI has become, by certain measures, and this is from RAND, around 1,250 times more effective over the past 6 years. This is measured in terms of the, basically the length of tasks that an AI can autonomously complete, right? It used to be, they could finish tasks that a human would be able to do in, I don't know, 10 seconds, 20 seconds. Now, it's up to the days, even the weeks, right? Okay, that doesn't work. Cool. And you could ask, why is that? There's a couple of reasons, or maybe many reasons, but it comes down to how innovation, how research actually happens in AI. AI is fast, modular, cheap. You can just run, a bunch of trials. It is permissionless, and it is, of course, relatively open, or it was before, 2 or 3 years ago. If you think about how innovation happens within collective intelligence, and here we're talking, of course, about organizations, it is pretty dang slow. And you can literally look at, over here, you might not be able to read this, but it's basically, I worked out what it might look like to intelligence researchers a couple years ago, just what exactly goes into doing research within CI, within the social sciences more broadly, and just how long it takes. And I'll especially emphasize deploying an actual experimental design at scale goes from months to versus an AI takes weeks, and nowadays it takes literally hours, right? And iterating a design once it's actually deployed, imagine you've deployed we told some organization or a group of people to run experimental design. You can't change that while it's going on. And of course, you can do that in AI. So the question I have for you all is, how do we actually make organizations 1,250 times more effective over the next 5 and 6 years? That is the mission. It's the big question. And as a reminder, this is actually pretty dang important for the people who have maybe bought hook, line, and sinker into the AI hype. Organizations are still the most intelligent entities in the world. And this is something that the frontier labs themselves say, right? Their stated goal is to get to the level of empirical superintelligence that's comparable to a modern organization. So, the project, and I'm not going to pose this as the solution, but I think it's one step towards the solution. that I've been sort of ideating with Ruben and some other folks in the Stanford and Metagov communities is this idea of a startup incubator for autonomous organizations. So it'll do all the same things that we're thinking about relative to traditional incubator stuff, things like funding, mentorship, legal scaffolding even. But the key thing is it'll also be a little bit, think about almost like a robotic stuff, where we launch organizations into the wild as experiments, where we run them as experiments and learn from what they do. And I think it's very, very much in the ethos of the way that DAOs have worked over the past 4 or 5 years, 10 years. Okay. Take a small break. Who the heck am I to be tell me all these things? So I'm Gosh. I usually describe myself as a computer scientist / mathematician. In reality, I feel like most of the time I just write emails these days. I grew up in something called category theory, which is a certain branch of math that folks here may or may not have heard of. As I mentioned before, I lead Project's graduate movement for public AI, which do both things like the public AI infrastructure utility that has been mentioned, public AI libraries projects, and various rumblings across Switzerland, Singapore, Spain, UK, and others. And of course, I currently research at Metagov, which is happily hosting this series today. Before that, I did the theory of machine learning, trigonometry, and robotics at a few different organizations. Okay, let me pull out a little bit, and because I have so much time, because I guess I'm nervous. I can only imagine what SK and Jamie were doing presentations on, and I can probably, it would be hilarious if I fight. Maybe I could spend like 4 or 5 minutes just pretending to give their talks. Because then take a step back and talk a little bit about like, okay, what's underlying this set of questions? What's driving this idea of autonomous organizations? Because we can obviously see the examples, and I'll talk a little bit about those examples online today. But is there a framework for thinking about like this history of organizational development and research? So let me see, what is the next one? Okay. I was going to add a few slides here in that half hour that I thought I had. But just tell the story, just to tell the story, I guess. So a couple years ago, or I guess last year really, I was at UCLA working with a bunch of mathematicians on this idea of a researcher program to accelerate innovation within collective intelligence. And another way of telling the story is how to import ideas from artificial intelligence, which I was just mentioning is moving much, much faster into CI, into the social sciences. And to start there, I really started at one particular observation, this idea of the symbolic AI. How many people here know what symbolic AI is or heard of it? Huh? Maybe you weren't like also on Ulrich. So a symbolic AI, there's actually no real formal definition. Symbolic AI is really, the best way to think about it here is, it's an AI that represents the world through symbols that humans can read and interpret, right? And the quintessential, or perhaps the first example, arguably first example about an AI is the logic theorist. So that's Simon Newell, Herbert Simons, Simon Newell, with his grad students working together, playing some chess, doing a demo of what the logic theorist could do. The logic theorist was, largely speaking, a kind of like a piece of symbolic programming, if you kind of know much about that word. But the key thing that we're sort of drawing on here, that this connection between artificial and collective intelligence from very, very early on, was that just as we think of AI and the social sciences as a kind of like in this duality, the logic theorist was really based on Herbert Simon's prior experience, studying the bureaucracy. So before he was a quote unquote AI researcher, he realized that a world-renowned scholar of the bureaucracy of the social sciences. And sub-symbolic AI is just this idea that you don't actually have to understand, humans rather, don't have to understand what is going on underneath inside the AI. So let's talk a little bit about symbolic organizations. So let's just continue the metaphor. Right now, especially in this space, we work a lot on things called DAOs, right? Where many of us are familiar with them. And the thing about a DAO is that they are really fundamentally symbolic organizations. Their processes, their bylaws, how they work are entirely enshrined in visible code that you can kind of audit, look at as the soul as a feature of these things, right? But the reality is that this explicitness, this clarity, has a kind of cost. DAOs are often or have been sold as this really fast-moving vehicle for change, for experimentation. The reality is they're often just as slow to change as traditional organizations because of the cost of changing any one of these parameters, this debate, this discussion. I wonder, Seth is not here right now, but Seth is going to push back against me tomorrow, say, oh, this question is actually really important. But if you're trying to do research on organizations, that becomes a real problem. So the question is, can we encode structure without ever writing it down? Can we build these kinds of sub-symbolic organizations? And this gets back into what we're calling autonomous organizations today. I'm not going to try to define what an autonomous organization is. I prefer just that we look at some of the examples that we already have today. So we have things like the Facebook newsfeed. You may not think of that as an autonomous organization, but it is literally built interactions between a bunch of people shaped by an algorithm that no person can actually fully control. It is in some sense autonomous. Like a lot of things that are happening on Facebook, me communicating with somebody else via the Facebook newsfeed, is effectively not now controlled anyway. You can imagine, or these already exist, autonomous repos, where a bunch of PRs are merged into a repo by an agent. A repo, in many ways, is a kind of like a subtext for an organization. These things are already run autonomously. And they actually had that even before the recent sort of way we call code experiments. And of course, speaking of the Claude Code, we now have agent swarms, hundreds of coding agents coordinated by some sort of organizational logic, right? Cursor has been running the experiments in the background for quite a while. It's interesting because like a lot of these things are, based on existing organizational logic. There's like a manager, right? There's some agent which is distinguished as the manager. Then there's like a reviewer, and then there's like coders and specialists. And we're kind of reproducing the way that organizations, human organizations work. We're in SF, so many of you are probably familiar with the vending machine work that Anthropic and Andon Labs have done. Super interesting here, where there's effectively an AI manager and a kind of human employee representing new ways that organizations, in this case, as in a kind of a thing that makes money and has employees, can potentially be deployed. And of course, the folks here, I imagine, are relatively familiar with DAOs. So organizations whose governance is enshrined in code, most often, always on a blockchain. And the question is, what could they look like in the future? And I think that is going to be very TBD. Okay, I'm running out of time, so let me just share very briefly this vision of kind of autonomous organizations, incubator, and how to get involved. First off, if you want to start an autonomous organization, come talk to me. If you have an open source framework or primitives, like evals, telemetry, I know there's some folks from, I think, like Virtual Society up or downstairs, I think us this way here. It's this stuff we would love to sort of integrate and start experimenting with and building some indices and data around. And lastly, join us and do some research.
Love to sort of work with you to figure out not only the engineering sort of architecture necessary to run efficient and effective some autonomous organizations, well, I think also the legal and the ethical frameworks, because obviously these are literally months old, right, these things. What should they look like in the world in a way that actually respects the fact that, humans are involved or should be involved? Okay, with that, I will pass it to SJ, who I believe is now in the room.
Take it back. Thank you, sir.